So, as I have told you guys before, in the Invincible multiverse, we get to see multiple alternate versions of every character. But so far, Mark Grayson has the most interesting alternate versions of himself. The alternate Mark Graysons are alternate versions of Invincible. Few of them have altruistic motives and are good. Most of them just happen to be dangerous, ruthless, and evil. With a few of those, their fathers always raised them to take over Earth, whether they were raised on Earth or not. With the other evil ones, there was something else that turned them evil. For a lot of those, it was Adam Eve being hurt or killed that made them snap. So today, we will have a look at the story of one such alternate Mark Grayson, who is more popularly called Mohawk Mark. His name definitely suits him, because unlike other variants of Mark Grayson, this one is distinguished by his unique mohawk. In his dimension, things were almost identical to the main dimension. Mohawk Mark and Adam Eve had grown close after Rex cheated on her with Kate. However, there was something off about Mohawk Mark, like he was just not entirely human. He didn't see things the same way others did. There were little things, but the teen team members mostly ignored them, thinking that he was just being weird. But what actually happened was, Mohawk Mark realized how different he was from the people of his planet, and how stupid it was for him to waste any time protecting them and fighting them without getting anything in return. He realized that the people of Earth could be worshipping him. Then, just like in the original dimension, Omni-Man told him about the Viltrumites and their plan of taking over Earth. This Mark always had a different mindset, so Omni-Man successfully enlisted him, and Mohawk Mark actually thought the teen team would also help him take over the planet. Eve actually considered it, but after he killed Rex, whom she was no longer in love with but very close with, she fought him. Seeing no other way in front of him, Mohawk Mark then killed Adam Eve, Kate, and who he thought was Robot, because he and everyone else were unaware that Robot was not just a robot. Next, Mohawk Mark went to the Mauler twins of his dimension and tore off the head of the one with the nose ring before they could talk. Mohawk Mark also destroyed the remaining Mauler's cloning equipment, which stopped him from cloning himself again. Finally, a chain of events transpired in which everyone probably found out that Omni-Man and Invincible were direct descendants of their emperor and were rightful rulers of planet Viltrum and the Viltrumites. But after a long chain of events, Omni-Man, Thaddeus, and Thula were killed, and Mohawk Mark was appointed the new emperor of the Viltrumites. Thrag was cast out and led a rebellion against Mohawk Mark and his new Viltrum empire. Because he was not a superhero in this dimension, he never fought or killed Conquest. Now that he was the emperor of the Viltrumites, he took over the Earth easily with the Viltrumites' help and set up their high-tech power center citadel in the Pentagon. Their General Crag was appointed to oversee the Science Commission with Earth scientists they likely enslaved. Conquest became the main sentry for the planet, and Anissa and Lucan were assigned other lead roles. Meanwhile, the Viltrumite forces continued to hunt the remaining Mauler at every turn and prevented him from cloning himself again. The remaining Mauler was not able to rebuild his equipment or find a place to be alone with his work. However, when he saw the governments of the world overthrown and saw one power trying to manage the planet and not working, he saw the error of their ways and wanted to stop them and restore order. Also, Monster Girl never met Robot, who never found a cure for her reverse aging, so she digressed into an infant and became an even stronger and larger but more sleepy monster when she transformed. Most of Earth's citizens who still lived knew it as the Monster, and the Viltrumites captured it. It became a weapon of mass destruction for the Viltrumites, and whenever the Viltrumites unleashed the beast, it was difficult even for them to contain it. It was around this time when Angstrom Levy arrived in Mohawk Mark's dimension and offered him assistance in expanding his empire to other dimensions if he fought from his side in the Invincible War. Mohawk Mark accepted his offer and decided to participate in the Invincible War. So, on the first day, Mohawk Mark destroyed part of Stronghold Penitentiary with ease and was surprised at how low-tech it is. Soon, Original Mark came to battle him, and they turned out to be evenly matched in strength. But when Mainstream Mark smashed his fist against the Mohawk Mark's temples, he rendered Mohawk Mark temporarily unconscious. But he did not stay down for a long time, as he soon recovered and flew through a building on the second day and laid waste to New York City by the third day. But later, when Angstrom Levy came, he was also teleported into another dimension with the 7 other surviving alternate marks. One of those 7 was also the Sinister Mark. So while they were figuring a way to escape, the 8 of them talked a lot, mostly about what turned them evil. Weeks passed, and the 7 of them realized that the 8th one was a jerk. So because they were starving to death, they all ate him. It was him or them, and Mohawk Mark hated him so much he almost did not want to eat him. Mohawk Mark decided not to eat any of them because he thought cannibalism is horrible and left and had to drink his own sweat and other stuff to survive. During this time, he also grew a mini goatee. The other 6 alternate marks ate each other until only Sinister Mark, alternate Mark 8, and alternate Mark 17 remained. Soon, Sinister Mark would go insane and find and attempt to eat Mohawk Mark, but Mohawk Mark managed to somehow escape. Later, the Mainstream Mark was also teleported into that dimension with Mohawk Mark and Sinister Mark. Mainstream Mark saw that the Sinister Mark had killed and eaten alternate Mark 17 with alternate Mark 8 and killed and was now eating alternate Mark 8. Sinister Mark then tries to attack and eat the Mainstream Mark, but Mohawk Mark saw the Mainstream Mark being attacked by Sinister Mark and not knowing who he was due to the new costume, slammed Sinister Mark away and flew away with Mainstream Mark. Mohawk Mark would tell the Mainstream Mark that they should work together to stop Sinister Mark from eating them both. While flying, Mohawk Mark talks to the Mainstream Mark a lot and confesses that it is really nice to be able to do so. He then helped the Mainstream Mark fight Sinister Mark, and during their fight, he pummeled him until Sinister Mark died. Mohawk Mark shouted at the dead Sinister Mark how he made him eat another person, and how he planned the cannibalism by turning the alternate marks against each other. The Mainstream Mark tried to stop Mohawk Mark, but it was too late, and just then, Angstrom Levy opened up a portal back to the Mainstream dimension. The Mainstream Mark would instantly spot it and return home, but there he was trapped by Angstrom. Mohawk Mark then also re-entered the Mainstream dimension and fought Angstrom, until the Mainstream Mark reminded him that he cannot return Mohawk Mark home if he is dead. Then, Angstrom traps Mohawk Mark. Angstrom then explains that he has a change of heart and apologizes to the Mainstream Mark for everything he has done before letting them both go. He opens up a portal to Mohawk Mark's dimension, but Mohawk Mark thought something and pulled Angstrom in with him before the portal closed. Mohawk Mark then tortured Angstrom so that he would fulfill his promise of giving him access to other dimensions he could conquer and could add to his empire. Angstrom would refuse due to his newfound responsibility of doing the good he originally set out to do before his accident. So instead, Mohawk Mark decided to have his scientists cut the power out of Angstrom while keeping him alive until that is accomplished. Meanwhile, Mohawk Mark would shave off his mini goatee. He also started to miss Adam Eve, so he would hire cosplaying prostitutes with ginger mohawks to live in his personal chambers dressed up like her. He also realized how terrible the majority of his alternate dimensional counterparts were. Then some more time passed, and eventually the original Mainstream Mark had the Mainstream Robot figure out how to visit Mohawk Mark's dimension and rescue Angstrom Levy. When they enter his dimension, Conquest would bring them down to Mohawk Mark's personal chambers believing they are negotiators from Thrag's rebels. However, Mohawk Mark recognizes the mainstream Mark from his last visit to the mainstream dimension and asks Conquest to leave. The mainstream Mark is uncomfortable with the prostitute Atom Eves, and Mohawk Mark simply tells him that in his dimension she died and he needed to fill the void. However, he is still grateful towards the mainstream Mark for providing his escape from the alternate dimension where Angstrom trapped him. The mainstream Mark asks about Angstrom, which Mohawk Mark understands and says that he had it taken care of, but also knows that the mainstream Mark still does not trust him. So, he shows the mainstream Mark and Robot where his scientists are holding Angstrom, and explains that he's only keeping Angstrom alive until his scientists succeed in extracting his powers. The mainstream Mark is horrified, which confuses Mohawk Mark, who thought that from what the mainstream Mark said, he was going to make sure Angstrom was dead or kill him himself. The conflicted mainstream Mark admits that he was not going to torture Angstrom if he was still alive. Mohawk Mark tells the mainstream Mark how if something would turn him evil, he could rule his world. Robot then realizes how the mainstream Mark could foil his plans, and he sees the opportunity to activate a sonic pulse which is lethal to Viltrumites, and makes both Mohawk Mark and mainstream Mark cringe. The mainstream Robot kills Mohawk Mark's scientists so there are no witnesses, and then fires a bomb into Mohawk Mark's mouth. It burrows into Mohawk Mark's esophagus, and because his insides are somewhat more vulnerable than his outsides, when it explodes, it blasts out his eyeballs and causes his internal organs to burst in his throat. This, of course, kills Mohawk Mark, and then the mainstream Robot proceeds to kill Angstrom Levi himself and strand the mainstream Mark in Mohawk Mark's dimension. So this was how Mohawk Mark's story came to an end.